Hello, CIS41A. In this video, I'm going to go over the final review. So you would need to use Canvas to be able to download the document. You can follow along. So the final review is not required. It's recommended that you use this as a study guide for your final exam. And for your final review, it's going to be 60 questions while the exam is 50 questions, multiple choice. The exam will be released during the final exam week. You will have from Monday to Wednesday to be able to complete the final exam. Make sure you check the due date, and also you will need to use Lockdown Browser. When you use Lockdown Browser, simply you just click on the exam and it's going to prompt you for a passcode. I will send a passcode via Canvas message, and also in the Canvas module, you'll be able to find the passcode. You will need to enter the passcode to be able to download the Lockdown Browser for this particular exam. It does not work with other links, so make sure that you access your Canvas exam to be able to download the appropriate browser. And you will need to log into Canvas on that browser to be able to take your exam. So next, we're going to go over the questions from chapter 1 through 16, part of your textbook. And the questions usually just encompasses the assignments that we went over prior. So in the first question, it asks you, which of the following options are the responsibility of the cybersecurity analyst? You would need to select all the options. A, protection, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We talked about how in cybersecurity, our goal is to make sure that we implement measures and practices for CIA. So make sure that you select that option. Second, you need to have a strong understanding of threat environment. That means that we have to perform threat intelligence along with be able to go through the task for threat analysis and be able to identify internal and external threat. Third is respond to possible threats in the organization, and threats can come from different areas. We can look at malware as a threat, or we can also look at internal, that could also be people. And then lastly, the fourth option is to characterize risks, attacks, and security controls. Risk is the possibility that a threat is acting on a vulnerability. And so we want to be able to classify the risk, manage the risk, and respond to the risk, while we need to detect attacks and prevent attacks from happening in our networks and in our infrastructure, along with implementing security control to make sure that we are preventing and more on the proactive instead of reactive. For question number 2, it asks you which of the following security options provides confidentiality in CIA. And if you look at the option, encryption is the best option to choose here, because encryption is going to allow us to protect confidentiality compared to hashing, monitoring, and clustering. Those focuses on other areas. So for example, hashing is for integrity versus encryption is for confidentiality. For number 3, which of the following security options provides integrity in CIA? And as I mentioned in the last question, hashing is best for this. Hashing allows us to use the value that's generated from the hashing algorithm to be able to match it. And so if it's exactly matched, that means that the file or the object has integrity. If it has changed, then the hashing value would be different. For question number 4, it asks you what type of information is often protected by regulatory standards and is always governed. And that's your personal identifiable information, your PII. This is critical in data privacy and also for organization to protect. It is required in a lot of compliance area. For example, HIPAA or even FERPA. So we want to make sure that we protect personal identifiable information to follow regulatory standards and compliance. In question number 5, it asks you to fill in the blank. A blank is a possibility that a threat might exploit the vulnerability. And this is the true definition of a risk. So a risk is a possibility that the threat might exploit the vulnerability. And we want to be able to qualify and quantify risk. So make sure that we understand and know what risk is. For question 6, it asks you which of the following equations is used to calculate risk. And to compute risk, we would take threat multiplied by vulnerability. That will give us the result for risk. And as I mentioned before, we want to be able to quantify the risk. That could be to a number, or you can also qualify to a numeric level, which allows you to be able to quantify it. So remember, the equation for risk is threat times vulnerability. Question number 7, which of the following network parameter measures should be implemented to protect company infrastructure? For the final exam, you would only have one correct option, but for the review, we want to select A, B, and C. A, we need to make sure that we set up firewall to control inbound and outbound traffic. That means that we want to make sure that we block and allow specific type of traffic that's coming in and leaving the network. B, implement protection of web and application server using firewall. Normally here, we would use application firewall to be able to protect content and also activities on our web server along with the application server. Normally these are located in the DMZ. Third, use DMZ to restrict access to sensitive data and resources. So that means that we want to isolate the internal network by implementing a border firewall along with using application server firewall to make sure that the public area of our network, which belongs in the DMZ, is still available to the public, yet we are going to prevent sensitive data and resources from leaking from the internal network. So we want to select A, B, and C for question number 7. For question 8, fill in the blank. The blank is a technique used to work backward from a finished product to figure out how it works. And this is the true definition for reverse engineering. We talked about different type of techniques for reverse engineering, whether it's going to be when we're looking at malware or when we're looking at an application. So B is the answer for number 8. Question 9, which of the following options represent threat intelligence categories? And we need to select A. That will be strategic, tactical, and operational threat intelligence. These are the 3 categories that we want to be able to select for this particular question. All the others are incorrect. Question 10. What type of intelligence consists of highly detailed information allowing response to specific threat and often includes the origin, changes, capabilities, behavior, and prevention? And that's option D, operational threat intelligence. So operational threat intelligence, we're looking at how data or system configuration could be changed, how it's behaving, and sometimes that could be impacted by malware or attacks. And what are some of the prevention measures? So operational threat intelligence really give us the overall look on what threat exists in our infrastructure, along with how that threat has changed the way we operate day to day. Number 11, what type of activities take place during the first phase of the threat intelligence lifecycle? And we want to select A. The first step is to gather requirements from breaches, trends, risk assessment results. And we want to go back and look at what had happened in the past. And so that way we can understand what's needed to be implementing for the future. And that is the first step in threat intelligence lifecycle. Question 12, what type of threat actors are most dangerous and difficult to detect? And that's your insider threats. Insider threats are usually self, and that could be people mostly, because attackers from the outside is very easy to detect, especially that can be notified via your security appliance. So insider threats can take a long time, and it is a lot more difficult to detect. So D for number 12. 13, which of the following target detection activities take place during the first stage of Lockheed Martin kill chain model? We need to select C for this question. And C tells you to review website visitor logs and alerts historical searching. So when you're looking at target detection activities for the Lockheed Martin kill chain model, we want to see what's happening via the public domain, which is normally your website, and looking at how the former alerts or historical information will be able to help us identify some of the activities in the kill chain model. For 14, what is needed before performing active reconnaissance of the system and the network? We want to make sure that there's written permissions to authorize security analysis. And we want to make sure that this is signed and approved so that way we can perform it on a specific system or network. So we need to select B for number 14. 15. Which of the following tools is used for passive reconnaissance? And we know that there are active and passive reconnaissance. For passive reconnaissance, we want to be able to do it quietly where system is not going to be able to see that we are looking at certain things. So a lot of the times the tools that we use in passive reconnaissance is going to be mostly, it's not going to be as invasive compared to active reconnaissance. So we want to select A, specialized search engines. So we can use search engines to look at IoT devices, look at maybe IP addresses and so on. And B, packet sniffer. So when you use things like Wireshark, that's a little bit less invasive compared to port scanner like Nmap. Nmap is very invasive. So port scanner is not a passive reconnaissance. It is an active reconnaissance. So we want to select A and B for number 15. For 16, true or false? An organization can prevent active reconnaissance by limiting external exposure and services causing the organization's external footprint, and that's true. We want to prevent active reconnaissance by looking at the services that's being used. So when they're using port scanning, we should be able to detect that. And a lot of it can come from your monitoring. Understand the current state of its security. That would be A, identifying, prioritizing, and remediating vulnerabilities. So we need to see our existing vulnerabilities. We need to make sure that we prioritize them based on the most critical level. And from there, we would remediate the most critical areas downward. So A for 17. 18. Payment card industry data security standard PCI DSS requires how many vulnerabilities scanned in a year? And based on the compliance requirement, we need to perform 4 vulnerability scans per year for PCI DSS. That means that any company that implements credit card transactional systems like Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, they're required to perform at least 4 vulnerability scans per year. 19. Based on FISMA requirement, what information is scanned for vulnerability assessment? So for FISMA, this is going to be for a federally regulated company. This is required to scan information system and hosted application. So if the application is hosted by a service provider, that also needs to be assessed for vulnerability, even if it's not in-house. Number 20, what type of vulnerability scanner interacts with the scan host to identify services and vulnerabilities? And that's your active vulnerability scanner. And that could be your port scanner like Nmap. Number 21, true or false? A vulnerability scan provides results for different locations in the network to identify vulnerabilities inside and outside the network and views from the internal external threat actors. And that's false. We want to have a variety of vulnerability scans. We don't want to just have one type. So a variety of vulnerability scan is going to give you the inside and the outside views and how the weaknesses of your network and infrastructure would be. Number 22, what is used to determine the remediation priorities based on criticality and of vulnerability in impacting the operations of the organization? And that's your vulnerability report. This report is gonna give you the priorities on what needs to be fixed and what type of critical areas of your operations needs to be addressed based on what you have assessed in vulnerability. For 23, given the following information, determine the impact subscore of vulnerability interpretations. So confidentiality is 0.65, which is 65%. Integrity is 0.35, 35%. Availability is 0.000%. So to determine the impact subscore, your ISS, we would take 1 minus, and we would take the 1 subtract confidentiality. So in this case, I would take 1 subtract 0.65, multiply it by 1 subtract 0.35, multiply it by 1 subtract 0. So once you have the subtraction for confidentiality, integrity, and availability, we would multiply those values together, and then we would subtract it by 1. Then after that, to be able to get the impact level, we would take 6.42, which is a constant, multiply it by the output of ISS. So that would be 4.96. And in this range, right, we can take a look at how that would be low, high, or medium. So the calculation would look like this. And this we have done in our assignment before. So for the exam, you're going to see something similar, but pay attention to the values and how you would apply those values in the equation. The equation for ISS will be provided. For 24, given the below information, determine the exploitability subscore. Calculate the exploitability subscore given attacker vector score is 0.08 or 0.8. Attack complexity score is 0.77. The privileges required score is 0.80. User interaction score is 0.75. So to compute the exploitability subscore, we would take a constant 8.22 times attack vector times attack complexity times privilege required and times user interaction. So we simply take the given value 0.8 times 0.77 times 0.80 times 0.75, and we would multiply it by the constant, which is 8.22. That would give us the result of 3.04 as the exploitability score. So make sure we know how to do this for the final exam. Number 25, what type of cloud service models allow serverless application architecture in which developers write functions in response to the events? And that is your function
as a service. So the key word here is this: write functions in response to the events. So C, FAAS. 26. What type of cloud deployment models require the use of technology that unifies different cloud offerings into a single coherent platforms? And this is going to be hybrid cloud. The key word here is that we are unifying different cloud offerings. So that means that we're combining different types, which leads us to C, hybrid cloud. 27, fill in the blank. The blank is an approach that unifies the process between development and operation, in which agile approach, software testing, and release become automated and collaborative to provide more frequent updates. So the keywords here that you should look at is development and operations in the agile approach. That leads to DevOps. So DevOps encompasses the process for development and operation for testing, release, and collaborative between business and development. 28, what type of cloud access security brokers, your CASB, physically and logically reside in the connection path between the user and the service? And the answer for this is going to be your inline cloud access security brokers, or your inline CASB. It is not the other options. So the keyword here is your physical and logical connection path, and that's inline CASB. 29, what type of security control entail creating and applying organizational policies, provide regular security awareness training, and that's your administrative security control. That mostly encompasses the rules or the policies on what needs to be followed, along with training people to practice security. So B for 29. 30. In the layered security model, which of the following security controls is critically used to secure web applications? For a web application, we mostly focus on input validation to prevent injection attacks. And for the other areas, if you look at the other options, that's really for data privacy, network security, and physical security. So for web application security, a lot of the attention is put towards input validation for injection prevention. 31, fill in the blank. A blank is used to access managed devices that are in another security zone, such as DMZ and organization network. And that would be your jump box. Jump box is used to manage devices that's outside of your zone. So in the area of DMZ, where it is partially public, we want to use jump box to be able to do this. And you can use multiple jump boxes for different zones and subzones. So we want to select D for number 31. 32, which of the following technologies can be used to centralize controls through integration APIs for monitoring, detection, and prevention? And the answer for this is A, software-defined network, or your SDN. SDN allows you to control the integration of APIs and making sure that we are monitoring, detecting, and preventing any kind of security incident. So this really helps us streamline and automate a lot of the things, but also especially when it deals with applications and APIs. Number 33, what type of system is used as a remote log server for centrally monitoring and analyzing the infrastructure? That is your Bastion host. Bastion host is used as remote log server. 34. What type of access management system is used to create, store, and manage identity information, groups, permissions, and other information needed to support account identities? And this is IAM, or Identity and Access Management System. You often find this now in cloud, especially if you're using infrastructure as a service. the first thing that you need to set up in cloud for groups and users, you would need to access your IAM or Identity Access Management System. This is now also integrated in Enterprise, where you would be able to incorporate this with your SIEM or your SIEM to be able to detect any kind of security incidents based on your groups, your user accounts, especially when we're looking at escalation of privileges. 35, true or false? Radius lacks integrity checking of sent data, allowing attackers to access traffic and make arbitrary changes to the data or use replay attack, and this is false. TACAS plus or TACAX lacks integrity in checking sent data. Radius is not. Radius is used for remote server. So false for 35. 36. What type of access control assign user rights based on the environment? And when you're looking at this question, you need to focus on the keywords here is environment for user rights. So environment that will point to attribute. The other options are role-based, and discretionary. So none of that has relation to environment. So attribute-based access control is needed for number 36. 37. What type of vulnerability is commonly used in the privilege escalation attacks? And they would use software vulnerability. And software often is designed with flaws. So the flaws in the software is used for privilege escalation, especially when they're leaving access capability from one account to another to be able to access different area of the application for development. So software vulnerability is the answer for 37. Number 38. In which phase of the software development lifecycle, SDLC, does patching and updating take place? And that is your operation phase. In operation, we want to do maintenance, and for maintenance that requires patching and updating our system. So D, operation phase for number 38. 39. In software development, which methodology uses linear development approach and add iterative process multiple times to gather requirements? That is your spiral model. So spiral model allows you to add based on the requirements, and that could change over time, right, throughout the project or throughout the development project, compared to waterfall that is from the beginning to end, and then an agile or Kanban. So C for number 39. 40. In software development, which methodology uses linear development approach? Oh, I did ask this question twice. So for 40, we would also select spiral. For 41, what is the main goal of DevSecOps model? And that's to integrate security in design, development, and operation. So DevOps, we already talked about how we have development and operation in uniform. And to implement security with that, we would have DevSecOps model. So A, to integrate security in design, development, and operation. 42. In hardware security, which of the following options is used to prevent other processors or devices from accessing and modifying location during the operation and ensure integrity of the operation? And that's your atomic execution. Atomic execution functionality is to prevent processors or devices to access and modify different areas. So that's going to allow you to implement hardware security in the design. 43, true or false? Regression analysis provides an understanding of what is occurring across the organizations and seeing the changes from the baseline or the normal levels of security events, and that's false. We would perform trend analysis so that way we can further understand what's going on across the organization as far as changes to our normal baseline operation, especially when we're dealing with network traffic, system activities and performance, along with user behavior. 44. Which of the following options is used to set an alarm for unwanted actions that can cause security risk? And that's your SIEM rules. This is a security information management system that allows us to look at and set the rules on what is being violated based on the policies and how that can allow us to streamline some of the security management options. Number 45. Which of the following tools is used in security orchestration, automation, and response? SOAR. And the common product nowadays is Splunk. Splunk allows you to implement security orchestration, automation, and response, all in one package. 46. Which of the following tools can be used to analyze user behavior? And that's your option D, User Entity Behavior Analytics, UEBA. None of the other actually exist. So this particular tool allows you to look at your system and user behavior. And so you can also look at how the trend in certain behavior can be built over time through the baseline. 47. When responding to security incident, which phase entails identifying the security incident is taking place? And that is detection and analysis phase. So in security incidents response, identifying security incident is part of detection. And then once we identify the incident, we would then go through, classify it, and then analyze it. 48. Fill in the blank. The blank is useful in security incident response because it contains procedures for specific incidents, which can be referred to responding to various security incidents effectively and efficiently. And that is your playbook. So each incident has different technique in how you respond. So by building your playbooks, you would be able to have quick access to what had happened in the past or potential incidents response that you have reported. So C for 48. 49. Which of the following option is used to determine the scope of impact when responding to an incident? And that is the degree of impairment causing the organization to recover from an incident and the effort required to recover from the incident. So how much do they need to recover and how long, right? And the impairment is the gap or the lack of certain areas. But as you're looking at the other options, they're very close in the way that the wording is. But the overall, we have to take a look at the effort in recovery and how they can recover from the incident. So that is going to be the scope of impact. 50. Which of the following monitoring method is used to detect compromises at network borders and internal boundaries? That's going to be your router-based monitoring, A. Because active monitoring, passive monitoring, and server-based monitoring does not look at network borders. Your router is the gateway, so it is at the network border, and we want to be able to use that to monitor what's happening around and inside our network. 51. Which of the following devices are used to analyze beaconing? And we want to use IDS or IPS, intrusion detection, or the intrusion prevention system to be able to analyze beaconing. 52. Which of the following types of traffic include scam probes, irregular peer-to-peer traffic between systems that aren't expected to communicate directly, spikes in the network traffic, or more direct attack traffic? So if you look at the questions, irregular peer-to-peer traffic, the keyword here is traffic for system that's not expected. So that will be unexpected traffic.
53. Which of the following options is used to identify abnormal OS behavior? We want to audit system permissions and privileges, because when that changes, we would be able to look at whether permissions and privileges are changed. In escalation of privileges, a lot of the time accounts privileges needs to be changed, and also file permissions need to be changed for it to access. So irregular or abnormal OS behavior, we want to look at system permissions and privileges. For 54, what type of tools can be used for Windows operating system analysis? We can use perfmon or performance monitor. Another option is to use resmon, but it is not on the list here. The other three options that's listed is for Linux. So perfmon is Windows tool for operating system analysis. 55. Which of the following commands is used in Linux system to view the status of the system services? And the command we want to use is service with the option status and the switch all. So that's going to allow us to look at the system status services. Fill in the blank for 56. When performing computer forensic investigation, the blank is used to discover occurrences in the system, such as system changes, known good files, deleted files, file system metadata, file carving, parse log files, and Windows registry analysis. We can use analysis utility, and that can be, named differently in the industry. Like analysis utility can be OS forensic, FTK, etc. Those are toolkits, but it is part of the analysis utility. So C for 56. 57. Which of the following file carving techniques look for the information about content of the file, such as character counts and text recognition? So your keyword here is your text recognition and character count, content of the file. So that will be content-based file carving. The header and the footer-based file carving, that's normally looking at the file header, and especially when you're working with images like JPEG, you would see that the header information is useful. File structure-based carving is looking at the file system and the file structure itself. And then registry-based is looking at the registry honeycomb. So B is the option for number 57, as the question asks you for the content of the file. 58, fill in the blank. The blank is conducted when the information must be retained for a legal case, and that is legal hold. Legal hold required that we want to retain investigative information for our litigation. 59. Which containment technique is most effective in incident response? And when you look at these options, removal is the best option. As we talked about this in our lecture, removal is the best containment, as it would no longer be present to have any kind of impact. 60. Acme Enterprise responds to one incident per month that costs $4,000. What is Acme annual loss expectancy, your ALE? So if we have one incident per month, that means we have 12 incidents per year. You would take the annual, which is 12, times the single loss expectancy, which is 4,000. So 12 times 4, which gives you $48,000. And this concludes my final review. You don't have to submit the final review, but it's best for you to use it and go through it as a study guide for the final exam. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that you will be able to gain some information as you review for this particular exam for CIS41A.